All right. Well, good morning. It's good to be with you all. We've been looking forward to being here. We got into the States. These are all, I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that people ask, like when did you come, when are you leaving, and those kinds of things. So we came into the States the end of May, May 25th, and we were in Ecuador in lockdown, in one degree like everyone else. On another hand, being in this kind of a country, there was 2 p.m. curfews every day. We hadn't seen anyone in months because we were not allowed out. In fact, we went out to just to go for walks, things like that. And if you follow us on Facebook, maybe you saw I was posting some videos of our walks around. And we're walking cow paths. All we're seeing is cows and wildlife. And I thought, this is a beautiful country. I love living there. It's the most beautiful place we've ever lived. You can ask any of our family and they'll all say that. We're in the Andes Mountains, 9,000 feet in elevation, and it's beautiful. So I was just taking my phone and just commentating on the scenery as we walked. And then we started getting comments back from people we knew in Ecuador saying, you're not supposed to be out of your house. And so I stopped posting videos. I can't say that we stopped walking. But so we were doing everything virtual. Everything was just online, Facebook Live, things like that, Zoom calls. And we're just about going insane of not seeing anyone. And so we said, well, we're planning to come back in July. Why not just see if we can get out earlier? Who knows when we'd be able to get back? Because there was a few flights that they had listed through May, and the last one was May 25th. And we thought there was no flights listed after that. And if we didn't get that one, who knows when we'd ever get back again. So we started putting things in motion, and God just provided every step of the way. We had to put our stuff in storage. We had several things to figure out, not to go into all the detail, but several things to figure out before we could make the trip back, let alone get tickets. We had passports that we had that were expired that we couldn't go and renew because right when we were getting ready to go to the embassy and renew them, they locked everything down and we couldn't go. And then we couldn't go get the visas, or the passports rather, because we didn't have plane tickets. But we couldn't purchase airplane tickets without passports. And we were so talking to both airline and the embassy, and finally they were able to work it out, and we got in and got the passports and flights and all of those kinds of things, and flew out on May 25th. And so we thank the Lord for the provision to be able to come back, and did a 2-week quarantine in Florida before, and then a couple more weeks there visiting some supporting churches, and then we came up north. And so the plan is to go back in January, Lord willing, again, depending on visas. Right now, it's open to fly into Ecuador. You just have to show a negative test within 48 hours of arriving. And we have friends that have gone there and come back and without issue, without problems, and as long as you have the negative test. So that's kind of the logistics of where we're at. So thankfully, we have been able to visit most of the planned churches that we had to visit. I called churches. I talked to Dave back in January or something, January or February, to set up a visit here, and a lot of other churches, and then everything shut down a month later. And we're like, okay, what are we doing? Are we still visiting? But we thank you that you're here and allow us to be with you and share the morning with you. I want to go to the Word of God first and share a few thoughts from Scripture, and then we'll look at some pictures and give you a bit of an update and let you know a little bit about where we're at and what we're doing in Ecuador. But hopefully the computer doesn't go to sleep and we lose all the PowerPoint stuff and all of that, right? So, many times when a missionary comes, we go to the Great Commission, right? Matthew 28. Who can tell me, just if you can shout it out, what is the Great Commission? Go into all the world, I heard. What else? Preach the gospel. What else? Make disciples. We're piecing it all together here, right? If I were to summarize it in just a couple of words, I know there's a lot there that we could unpack. And we're not going to go to Matthew 28 this morning because you're kind of piecing that together. But if I could sum it up in just a couple of words, I would sum it up with these words: just make disciples. Now, there's a lot more that we can put into that, right? But in just a couple of words, it's just make disciples. That's what we're commanded to do. And we talk about missionaries going as church planters, and I was never commanded to be a church planter, right? We were never commanded to go and start churches. Now, I'm not saying those things are wrong, right? But that's not what we were given to do. We were commissioned to go and make disciples. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, I will build my church, and even the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So it's not on my shoulders to plant God's church, to keep it going, to make sure all of these things. Now, there's certainly strategies, philosophy of ministry, all those kinds of things that play into this, but ultimately, this is God's church. And so I don't bear the burden of whether it succeeds or fails. It's God's church. And so we trust him for what he has. But what about the day-to-day? What does this look like in the day-to-day of life? What do I do? I think it's interesting. We've mentioned Matthew 28, the Great Commission. We have Matthew chapter 16 that I mentioned, where Jesus takes his disciples over to Caesarea Philippi and asks them, who do people say that I am? And they say, you're John the Baptist, one of the prophets, Elijah. And he says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus responds with, on this truth that you've said, Peter, that was given to you by God, on this truth, I will build my church. So we have the Great Commission. We have this great revelation to Peter of who Jesus is and the first mention of the church in the New Testament in Matthew chapter 16. But what about the day-to-day? You know, as we went to Nicaragua, first of all, we had great aspirations of planting a church and churches. We had plans. We had a strategic plan, a 5-year game plan, that kind of thing, philosophy, and what are we going to do and how's this going to look? And we had great hopes and dreams. You guys came a couple different times and participated in that. We were excited. The very first Bible study that we had in our home, after living a year in the community, the very first Bible study that we had in our home, your church was there. And so you guys have been integrally a part of what God was doing in Nicaragua. So we were excited about that. But what was our motive? You know, it's interesting to think about what our motive is when we're looking at all of this man, we want to see churches, we want to see people saved, we want to, all of these kinds of things, make disciples. And we say things like we want to reach our community, we want to win our neighbor for the Lord, we want to see people get saved, we want to do all, for what motive, what purpose? And we don't want to say this, but many times, well, we want to see every seat filled. We want to see big programs and great things happening in our church. Is that what it's about? See, we weren't given the command to build God's church. Jesus said he would do that. So what's our motive? To start a church, reach people, win them, whatever? No, I think when we look at the Great Commission, I would say this. If you can remember, if you forget everything else and remember this, hopefully you remember this statement that I want to make. It's impossible to fulfill the Great Commission without living out the Great Commandment. Can I say that again? It's impossible to fulfill the Great Commission without living out the Great Commandment. I mentioned a couple passages in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, the Great Revelation to Peter, the first mention of the church in Matthew chapter 16. The Great Commandment is also found in Matthew in chapter 22, and that's where we want to look this morning, Matthew chapter 22. So again, as they're trying to come to Jesus often and trap him and trick him with a question and look for some way that they can get at him, this is where we find a lawyer that comes to Jesus and asks him some questions, or ask him a question. And I'm going to start at verse 34, Matthew chapter 22, verse 34. It says this, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. You know, many times we think of the church as being a fortress, a hospital, a lighthouse it's called. Right? And I always laugh about it being a lighthouse, where a lighthouse is strategically positioned in a place to shine a light and keep people away from danger. Right? So I struggle with this idea of the church being a lighthouse because we want people to come, right? Not to stay away. But we think of it as a fortress, a place to come and escape the battles and attacks of the world. That, man, we just hold up here and, man, we'll get strengthened, we'll be here, we'll support one another. And there's one part of that we want to be in a place that we can be healthy and grow, but ready to move out. The church was commissioned to go and take territory, not to sit back on its heels. We've been given the armor of God, not just to protect ourselves, but we've also been given the sword of the Spirit, right? To go on the attack. This is a spiritual warfare. I think Ephesians chapter 6 is still very much in play, that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. That the things that we see in this world are certainly a spiritual warfare. It's not just, oh, well, this problem is coming up today. Now, I don't mean to give more credit to Satan than what's due, because we are certainly dealing with our sinful nature as well. But we're in a spiritual battle. We're in a spiritual battle. And the church is not a fortress to just hold up in, but we're to move out, to be preachers of the gospel. So we talked about the Great Commission, make disciples. What is the Great Commandment? Let's consider this question this morning for just a couple minutes. So as you look at the Great Commandment, Jesus breaks it down into two very easy to remember parts. He says, love God and love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. Very simple. One author said this, that how you live shows who you love. How you live shows who you love. And we can all identify with people that look at the church and accuse the church and point at the church and say, well, they're hypocrites. They don't love one another. I see how they live. I see how they interact. I see how they treat people. I see how they treat one another. How you live shows who you love. Someone also said, I'm horrible with authors and who said it and who preached it and who quoted it, but another person said, love is better demonstrated than defined. Love is better demonstrated than defined. Because if I was to ask you, well, how do you receive or give love? You would start explaining what love means to you, how you, not what love is, but how you understand love. Because one might understand love different than another, right? This is often the great battle between husband and wife, where the husband tinkers with his thing all day long and tries to do this and that and whatever, and the wife thinks he's over there doing his own thing, and he's not thinking about me, he's not caring about me, and he's thinking, I'm going to do all of this, and I got this all taken care of for her. Good, I've showed love to her. And she's like, I just wanted to spend time with him, right? And so this is the great struggle between husband and wife, to understand love with one another. There's a book, I think, by Chapman, written years ago, The 5 Love Languages, so you can try to understand what's my love language, what's their love language, how do we give or receive love. So we define this, or we demonstrate this rather, in different ways. So the lawyer comes to Jesus and he says, which is the greatest of all the commandments? Out of the 613 Old Testament laws, which is the one that's greatest? Man, if that question was posed to me, I'd be sweating bullets, right? I remember going through my ordination and they're asking me questions. I'm like, Irena still gives me problems about this, or trouble about this, because she says I was talking softly and trying to think through things, and which is not generally my response, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm thinking through this properly, giving the right answer. And so this lawyer, right, a lawyer comes to Jesus and says, which is the greatest of all the commandments? Well, he's speaking to the author of the commandments, right? And so Jesus says, the greatest of all of these is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Now, again, we could spend a lot of time to unpack all of this, but it's basically love God with all your being. Love God with all that you are. And I remember hearing from people from time to time, and they would say, I call it just religious talk. They would say, well, yeah, we love God. Yeah, we love God. Yes, we do this and that, and we love God. And you just process this in your mind, and you think, what does that mean? Are we just throwing those things out there just to sound like the Pharisees? Oh yeah, we love God. Because Jesus said, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, we love God. It's quite another thing to demonstrate it, right? And so Jesus connects these 2 points. One is a horizontal or a vertical relationship. Love God, right? That's between me and God. That's the vertical relationship. And that's demonstrated by a horizontal relationship, by how I love my neighbor. How do we know that we love God? By how we love our neighbor. Love is better demonstrated than defined. So back in the book of Luke, or over in the book of Luke, again, this same situation was posed about loving God. What was the greatest commandment? And then the lawyer asked, well, who's my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? It's a great question, right? It's a great thing to consider now. Who is my neighbor? And so Jesus goes into the story of the Good Samaritan, right? And he tells about how this guy was walking down the road to Jericho and he gets jumped by a bunch of thugs and they rob him and leave him for dead. And then a couple of religious people, right? If we put it in our context today, we see the church walking by and they kind of turn away. Oh, I can't deal with this. I don't have time. I don't want to get dirty. He might be dangerous. Maybe it's a trap. We have all of these thoughts going through our head. And so these couple of religious leaders, one by one, pass by. And who's the one that stops? It's a Samaritan, the enemy of the Jews, right? The Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along. And so the Samaritan helps, cleans him up, bandages him up, puts him on his donkey, takes him to the next town, pays for his treatment and for his care. He says, if he owes anything, if there's any other cost, I will pay it when I come back through again. And Jesus asked, well, and so who is the neighbor in this scenario? And they responded by saying, well, the one who showed mercy. The one who showed mercy. Our pastor said a few weeks ago, we were there and listening to a sermon, he says, God chooses people who people wouldn't choose. God chooses people who people wouldn't choose. It's easy to love those that are like us, that we're comfortable with, to demonstrate real love, right? To spend Thanksgiving and Christmas and a birthday and those kinds of things together. But here's the context of what happened with the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans and Jews did not get along whatsoever. And so Jesus uses this to say, even the Samaritans, even those that you don't get along with, that you cannot relate to, whose customs and ways are different, that those too are our neighbors. And we're to demonstrate love to them. And while we certainly still have this aspect in our culture and context today, I think we've kind of come an about face as a church, where a church will say, yeah, we'll go to Nicaragua, we'll go to Ecuador, we'll go show the love of Christ, we will send money, we'll get a food basket together, we'll do this and that, and we'll support a compassion kid, we'll give to the shoebox ministry, we'll send it out, we'll do all these things to show love to our neighbor over there. And I read a book this last year that speaks to this issue, and it's called The Art of Neighboring. Again, I don't remember the author's name, but you can look it up, The Art of Neighboring. And he poses the question, what if we interpreted this word neighbor as our literal neighbor? The people who live next door to us. Not just the people in Nicaragua or Ecuador or somewhere over there, but the person who lives next door. Would they be able to say, man, that person, they show love? Years ago, we were traveling somewhere, stopped in at a restaurant to eat, and of course, right? What do you do there? Anyway, we were there to eat, ordered our meal, and the waiter comes back later, and you know, their traditional, how is everything? Are you good? Can I help you? And all of that. You say, yeah, it's great, thank you. And then he stood there, and then it's a little awkward, right? Because I want to get back to my meal, and he's still standing there. And I kind of look up again, and you could tell he was feeling awkward too. And he lowered his voice, and he leaned in a little closer, and he said, are you guys Christians? No, I'm really awkward, right? Because I'm thinking, all right, he's like angling for a bigger tip or something like that. Like, what's his deal here? But we had a conversation there, and he said, I could just tell. I just looked at you and I could just tell. I have no idea what it was. No idea. And I was still thinking that he was angling for a tip or something. So we had a conversation, and I'm kind of not quite certain what he's doing. But this was actually a deal with it was a restaurant attached to a hotel, so that came with the price of the hotel. The only thing we had to pay was drinks, so I had a coffee and the girls had juice and things like that, whatever. And so I had to go pay for the juice, and the girls were using the bathroom as I went up to the counter because I didn't get the bill, and we're ready to go. Like, come on, I'm ready to hit the road. I've got things to do, places to go, and I'm waiting at the counter, and nobody's around. They're all doing their stuff, and finally someone comes out, and I said, yeah, I've got the drinks to pay for, and so they said, okay, let me look this up, and then our waiter, comes around the corner, and he says, oh no, I already took care of it. You guys are good to go. Who is my neighbor? Right? Who is my neighbor? Someone that I'd never met before, I'd have never seen since, showed love to us. But what about the person who lives next door? Man, it's tough because we live in, I call it a garage door culture, right? Where you pull up to your house, you hit the remote, you pull into your garage, you close the door, and you go into your house, and you never see your neighbor. We live off of sayings like fences make great neighbors. Right? We try to exclude ourselves from our neighbors. If we can never see them, they've got the yapping dogs, right? We won't mention names, right? The kids are always running through the yard. All kinds of things, right? That we get frustrated about our neighbors. But have we showed love to them? Have we seen them as an opportunity to demonstrate love? Can we do a little test here just as we wind down? You might say some of you have lived in your house for many years, a couple decades even, right? Maybe more. Can we do a little test to see how well you know your neighbors? Because you can't demonstrate love if you don't know someone, right? So here's a little test. Now, don't answer out loud. Just do a mental check in your mind. Have you ever played tic-tac-toe? And you draw the two horizontal or vertical lines and two horizontal lines, and you put the X's and O's and all of that kind of thing. So picture the tic-tac-toe board and put your house in the middle of that tic-tac-toe board. Okay, that's your house, that's your family. And then your neighbors, depending on whatever kind of scenario, an apartment building, a house with neighbors front, back, diagonal, whatever, you put your neighbors accordingly. All right, you can picture the white house is there and the brown house is there, that kind of thing. All right, so now fill in the blanks. Do you know your neighbors' names that live front, back, side, each side, diagonal? Do you know their names, their first names? And some of you, I see some nodding heads. Yep, I can fill in all of those. Okay, do you know their last name? Okay, I'm still seeing, yep, I got that, okay. Which means you've had conversations with them over the years, right? You said, oh yeah, Joe, Bob, Betty, whatever. So you know your neighbors by name. Okay, let's take it to another level. Do you know their birthdays? I can't remember my wife's birthday, right? How am I? But we remember the birthdays of the person that we love. We take something to them. Someone that we really love, we give them a gift, or at least a card or something, right? Hey, happy birthday, and it's a little demonstration of love. Do you know their birthdays, anniversary? Have you been able to sit down with your neighbor and discuss the difficult things, the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one? I could tell you stories of people that have been in our house and we've been in their house, of tough stuff that they're going through. Of someone that we had met in Ecuador, that they're just dealing with. Their daughter is graduating and going on to college, and there's this, their daughter was born in the States and could go to the States for school, but the lady didn't have the visas to be able to do that, and this whole scenario of breaking up of a family and sitting around our table and just in tears of what do we do? What decision do we make? There was this agony of what was going on. Another family that's dealing with addictions in their family, and the guy is in and out, and sometimes he's just gone for weeks at a time, and praying with them through this thing and looking at God's word and trying to encourage them toward truth. Have you been able to sit down with a neighbor we'll give money to the missionaries to go to Ecuador or Nicaragua. But what about your neighbor next door? I think I was talking with Ed about this yesterday, and just talking about us as missionaries with your church, that we are an extension. These are his words from yesterday. I hope you don't mind me quoting you, Ed, paraphrasing you. That we're an extension of Orchard Community Church. So you think, well, the missionaries should be doing this, that. You have an expectation of what missionaries should be doing over there. Can I flip that we have an expectation of what should be happening here in Rochester? Why should the missionaries be the ones out there making disciples, planting churches, and showing love to neighbors? Because we are part of the body. We're in this together, right? Let me just close with a couple of verses. In this whole thing of considering of loving our neighbor, loving our brother, John says this in 1 John chapter 4, verses 19 and following, we love because he first loved us. See, it's impossible for us to love in and of ourselves, right? We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother. Chapter 3, verse 11 says this, for this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should love one another. Several years ago, we were taking a walk down the road where we lived in western New York, south of Buffalo. And this couple was out there doing a little weeding in the garden. And we just stopped and said, hi, how's it going? And started talking. And they said, yeah, we're new to the community. We just moved in a few months ago. And we say, hey, let's get together. We'll have coffee or dinner or whatever. And so they did. They came to our house. We went to theirs. And a friendship arose from that. And if you were to look at it from the outside, in fact, we met their parents too, and they were like shocked that we were friends after they got to know us, because I was the pastor of the church about 4 houses up the road from them, and they're atheists. Anything religiously, politically, whatever, anything you could imagine, we are on opposite sides of the spectrum from where they stand and where we stand, and where we believe, how we practice, all those kinds of things. But we continued to get together for cookouts, birthday parties, whatever. We watched their little girl after she was born for a year or so, 2 years or something. And we always had conversations about these things that we disagreed on, right? Because it's inevitable to not talk about them. You're going to talk about these things. And so we just try to lovingly give a biblical response and continue to show love. And we've been praying that, maybe, man, if we could have a Bible study, like if we could just get to sit down and process this out with them. And we were praying about that. And so one evening, we were discussing something with them, and I quoted a scripture, and she is the lady, I don't want to say names because I know now this is all going out into the web and everything, but anyway, she is an English teacher, and she heard this verse that I quoted, and she said, well, that was beautiful. What is that from? I said, well, this is based on, this is from the scriptures. This is everything that we are talking about is based on scripture. And so we said, let's take this step, and we invited them to study it together. Would you like to sit down and study together? So they came for 2 Bible studies, just them and us, 2 Bible studies. And at the beginning of the second Bible study, they said, we're not sure we're going to continue this. We'll do this one, and then we're not sure if we're going to keep going. So at the end of the second Bible study, they said, you know what, you're not going to change our minds. We don't want to keep doing this. And we're crushed. We're thinking, oh, this is the end. This is it. But in the same breath where she said, we don't want to keep doing, because she's the more outspoken of the 2, and she said, we don't want to keep doing this. In the same breath, she said, can we still be friends? My job is not to save them. Are we starting to get that? I hope that we can understand that. My job is not to save them. What's my job? To love them. To love them. If we just bring this all down, when we realize that our job is not to save Rochester, New York, or the world, It's simply to be a vessel of love and grace in the place that God has placed us. Do you love your neighbor? Your little homework assignment is to go and fill in more of the information about your neighbor, of not just their names, maybe birthdays, but the needs in their life, what they're facing, the things that are important to them. Just share and live life with your neighbor. Demonstrate God's love, and man, the opportunities for the gospel will come. Amen? How much time do we have here? And the game is not until 5 o'clock tomorrow, so that's what we were talking about earlier. We're good? Okay. Let me show some pictures. Are we good? Can I advance? Yeah? Okay. So you saw our family up here already, and let me just kind of give an update about, I'm going to step to the side a little bit so I'm not right in the way. I'm still on the mic here. Good to go. You can hear me? So let me introduce by name, and you won't remember this, I know, but or names and ages, but from oldest to youngest, we have Eva and Annika. Eva's on here, Annika's next to her, Audra on the far side, Ivy, Eden in the middle, and Isabella. And so that's our crew. Someone was coming in and commenting how little time that I must have in the bathroom that I have to share with all of them. But my wife, Irena, and I have been married for 18 years, and I'm thankful for the life that he's given us together, that she's been with me through the ups and the downs and the struggles, and she's the love of my life, and we do this together. Many times, I think practically speaking, people will say, here's Dan and his family, because they cannot pronounce her name, and they can't remember everyone else's name, so it's just easier to say, it's Dan, and they start to think, oh, let's say, no, I'm not even going to try it, and they just say Dan and his family. But I'm not in this alone. We are here as a couple and as a family. That our first team for ministry is us as a family, and so we do a lot of things together. If you follow us through Facebook or our news updates and email updates and that kind of thing, you'll see that when I travel, we went to Germany and Europe a year and a half or so ago, and the two oldest girls went with me for that as we were talking about gospel and culture, and had people from all around the world to attend that, from Ukraine, Ireland, Iran, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, various other places, Brazil. And so Eva and Annika attended that with me, and Audra's gone on a trip with me back to Nicaragua to do some things there, and so we do this together. You might recognize some of these people, right? Up in the Andes Mountains, I mentioned 9,000 feet in elevation, and we had a great time as several of you guys came down and were able to see some of the things that we did. We did some work on a church property there, clearing away, trying to put a fence around and just secure the property and prepare it for future use. So there's a lot of hard work in the mud, right, Becky? Taking out barbed wire, and you remember that? Oh my goodness. So we had a great time. We appreciate your guys' help as we came down. One of the things that we were involved in was a church plant in a little place called Misicata, which was on the west side of the city, in the city of Cuenca, Ecuador. Cuenca is kind of in a bowl in the mountains, so you can look around and see the mountains all around. It's beautiful. And a church had invited us to come and participate in a church plant, or we call it a church transplant, right? Because they said, we want to multiply. It had been a conversation that we'd had, our ministry had had with them for several years, and they said, we want to do this, we want to multiply out. So they commissioned 5 families to go to the west side of the city and plant a church, and so they were transplanted over there on that side of the city. And so we rented a storefront facility and kind of opened things up and made it into a church facility. And God has been continuing to use these people, and we're excited about that. Remember the family or couple I told you about dealing with addictions and things like this? This is Ismael and Monica, and Ismael continues to battle addictions, and he's in and out of rehab. And we continue to pray for them and share their stories so that you will pray for them. Because this is real life. This is not a happily ever after kind of a story. This is real life, and he continues to battle those kinds of things, abandoning his family at times. When we first met them, They had two little girls about 3 and 4 years old, and she was about 5 or 6 months pregnant or so, something like that. And they now have, right before we left, their son turned 1, so he's like 1.5 now, maybe. And he continues to be in and out of rehab, and it's a battle. They're not believers. They have some religious background where they understand concepts, but it's an ongoing thing. And I'll tell you this, sometimes we'll lose track. People change their numbers, their phone numbers, their cell phone numbers in Latin America all the time. And we lose track of them, like we're gone, they've not messaged back, we don't know, this number's not working, and well, they're gone. You know, that's that, and when hopefully God used that relationship and whatever else, and then we'll get a message from them. Hey, this is Ismael, can we get together? And we pick back up again. And we're able to get together and talk through things. But that's the way it goes. But it's real life. And so we just want to share a little bit of their story. That one's not coming up, it's back there. Oh, okay. Let me back up. Maybe the thing turned off. Well, this is just a picture of a Bible study. I'll talk for a minute. This is a picture of a Bible study that we would have in our house. Bible studies are often, that's kind of the core of what we do. I'll give you a little background that some people will come up and say, to kind of challenge our approach to ministry. Do you want to go, they'll say to Irene, do you want to go lead a Bible study? Do you want to go do ministry? Do you want to go get away from the kids and the family and go do ministry somewhere? And some of you that have gotten to know us a little bit better will have recognized that we don't look at ministry as a place that you go and do ministry somewhere, but rather life is ministry, and that ministry happens not in spite of the family, but happens with family. That our home is not a place, again, a fortress to escape from the pressures of the world, but as a platform for discipleship and reaching people. And so I could tell you story upon story of just talking about it. Bible studies in general and those kinds of things, hospitality, but young women or older women that have been in our home and that Irena has had the opportunity to sit down with and talk through different things with and just encourage and disciple. And of course, to go out, the home is one place, but coffee shops is another great opportunity. We love to go and get a coffee in the Andes Mountains. And so Bible studies are kind of one of the core things of what we do for mentoring or discipling. And so this was one where it had grown to about 40. I think the last time we had everyone together was like 40 some people there. And just a quick story, so Bible study doesn't start until like after 8 o'clock at night because people work until 7. By the time they get there, it's like after 8. And people show up late and whatever. And then it's by the time you have Bible study and you have some refreshments, it's like pushing midnight and the kids are all running around. And a couple of the kids had gotten the markers and they were taking the markers and flicking them like this to like flick the ink out everywhere. And so they left about midnight, everyone left about midnight, and we're walking around and realizing there are green splatter spots all over the floor, the curtains, the walls, the furniture. They were like having marker fights with everyone. And we're like, what in the world is going on? So we're like, Irena's scrubbing everything and whatever, we're cleaning things up. And we're like, okay, it's time to break this Bible study up and get things kind of under wraps. But anyway, that's just kind of a side note. I've never told that story in public before. This is, if you guys were in Ecuador maybe with us last year, you maybe remember Pepe and Maritza and their 2 children here. And Pepe is leading the work, that storefront of that picture that we showed. He's officially leading that work as a servant leaders team member and pastor of that church. So he works part-time. He has his own business, and he cut his hours back intentionally to be able to dedicate more time to ministry and leading the church. And he's also raising support to help offset his cost of living. So we're excited about what God is doing with them. When we go back to Ecuador, the plan is to go to the northern part, to the capital, which is Quito, and work with this family in this church. It's a small church in Quito, just outside of Quito. And this is Darwin and Nellie and their little girl. And Darwin is sitting down because he's in a wheelchair, if you can't see that. He was in an accident when he was about 14 years old. He was ejected from the car that he was driving. He was driving his dad's car. and he was ejected from the car and paralyzed from the chest down. And he's got an incredible testimony of what God has done in his life. If you want to see more of his story, there's a 15-minute video that our ministry put together that just, it's an interview with him. And if you go to our website and click on the blog link and scroll all the way down, not all the way down, but down to some degree, you'll see his story come up in a video form. It's about a 15-minute video. But we're excited about the opportunities to go and work with Darwin. One of the stories in the video is how he was alone and his marriage was falling apart and there's a ministry was falling apart, and just what did God have for him? And the testimonies about how God brought people into his life. And so when we were looking about what's our next step, what are we going to do in ministry, and this opportunity came up and we approached him and said, Darwin, what do you think if we came and worked alongside you to accomplish these certain things over the next couple of years, and starting in January 2021? And he started to cry. And he said, I never thought that someone would come and offer to work shoulder to shoulder with me. And so there's all kinds of things that are on the list. Where actually this last week I was working at kind of outlining that more and putting a plan together of what that looks like. But there's all kinds of opportunities and needs there. And so the plan is to move up to the Quito area and work with Darwin. This is their brand new house. Brand new house. When I first met Darwin, he lived in a shack that was smaller than the size of the stage. And he could get in the front door and into his bedroom, and that was it. He couldn't get into his own bathroom because Latin America doesn't think about handicap accessibility. When I was walking into a store with him one day, he says, oh, I'll show you. So he goes up the ramp in the sidewalk, and he's rolling down the sidewalk, and he comes like this and stops because the wall is there and the door's on the other side. So he has to go down back into the parking lot and around, and he needed my help to jump the curb to get back on the sidewalk and get in the door. And he says, it's like that everywhere. Life is hard, and that's just his life. But he talks about the hope that he has beyond the wheelchair. And it's amazing testimony of his dependence on God, his real life struggle with this. And so a church donated, a couple years ago, a church donated money for them to tear their house down, and they built a brand new house with wide doorways and handrails in the bathroom and those kinds of things. Because about a month before he moved in, he was in the shower in his mom's house and moving from his wheelchair to one of these little plastic chairs to take a shower, and the leg broke on the chair and he concussed himself. And so now he's in a home where he can go into every room. He can go into the bathroom and get into his bedroom. He can go through the living room and all those kinds of things. And so we were there in February, right before a lockdown, like a month before a lockdown, helping put finishing touches, painting, and those kinds of things. So so someone gave him a brand new wheelchair, and so he was testing it. We were having races across the living room floor, and he smoked me. I couldn't keep up with him. You guys may remember Alex and Lorena, or we call him Gato and Lorena. He has kind of bright eyes, and who knows what Gato means? Cat. There you go. See, you're fluent. So Gato and Lorena, they were in Ecuador this last year with us for a missions internship. And a little bit of their story. I want to just kind of close with this idea here. Do we have time for questions? We can do that kind of thing? Or okay, so if you're thinking of stuff, start processing that now and we can do that. So we were in Nicaragua for about 5 years total. And we started learning something, that the word missionary in Nicaragua meant a gringo that comes to my country. Right? And we laugh at that, but we kind of have that same idea on the flip side. What is a missionary? It's our church sending people over there. And that's true, right? But we started asking them in Nicaragua, the churches, the believers in Nicaragua, do you have Matthew 28 in your Bible? Is the Great Commission in Spanish also? Or is it only in English? It's a ridiculous question, right? But we're trying to drive home a point that the Great Commission is not only for North America. That the Great Commission is for every believer in every church in every country around the world. That they have a responsibility to fulfill the Great Commission to go make disciples of all nations. And so we started challenging churches with this thought. And back before Gato and Lorena were married, when they were still teenagers, and they said, God's working in our hearts, we want to serve. And so, long story short, we started working with them, with their home church, about sending them as interns for a mission internship. And so they came to Ecuador that last year and nearly completed a year. They were expecting their baby during that time. She became pregnant during that time, and so because of insurance purposes, had to go back to Nicaragua for the birth of their son, Joshua Daniel, who's now a little more than 5 months old, 5.5 or so, something like that. And they, about 3 or 4 months ago now, also became official team members with servant leaders and are praying about where God would send them around the world. We're working through that as well with them. So some of what I'm doing is not just in Ecuador, but also working with young people like Alex and Lorena about where God would send them. You know, they came to Ecuador as missions interns from a country that had never sent, for the churches, that like 20 or close to 30 churches that we worked with in their circles had never sent a foreign missionary. And so when they were talking about going on a missions internship, it was a foreign concept to their churches. They had planted local churches within Nicaragua, in the Managua area, the capital city, but had never sent missionaries outside of their country. And so they started talking about, how do we finance this? How do we raise support? And it was those churches never had this in their budget, about supporting foreign missionaries. Not only that, but Nicaragua is the poorest Spanish-speaking country in the world. Now, I know we can split hairs when we talk about Honduras or Guatemala or wherever, that there are poor people everywhere. But if you were to get online and research over the last 5 years or so, you would see that Nicaragua is the poorest Spanish-speaking country. Now there's some other countries that are giving them a run for their money. But it has been, over the last decade, it's been the poorest Spanish-speaking country in the world. And God provided 85% of their support from within Nicaragua to come on that missions internship. Now, due to the pandemic, they've lost some support and they're going back to their home country in this transition, preparing for the next step. But we're praying for God to provide the funds that they need. We committed as a family that we would tell their story and ask that God would provide through this side, from our relationship, that if He would provide $500 a month for them. To this point, God has provided $250 per month for their family. And so we're excited about how God continues, just from this side, and then they have support from Nicaragua as well. So we share their story because, if I can say it this way, that we are a part of the body of Christ, right? That we often focus on our local church right here, and we forget that we're part of the universal church. And the United States, the church in the United States, is in sort of an area now where we have moved away from being the #1 sending country in the world. There are other countries, South Korea and the Philippines, I think, have been leading that over the last several years of sending missionaries. But the United States is still a part of the Great Commission. We have resources here that when there are people that are willing and ready to go and simply need another resource to help them do that, that we can be a part of that and help fulfill the Great Commission in that way. So if God is speaking to your heart about that, hey, how can I help Alex and Lorena? We're asking to consider $50 or $100 a month and to be part of that process and be part of their team to go into all the world. These are some of the things that Alex is doing Alex and Lorena are doing while they're in Nicaragua. They're helping a church replant. Their pastor died of COVID about 3 months ago, and the church came to them and said, what do we do? Can you help us? And so rather than just doing church, he said, well, let's evaluate. We went through this whole process to evaluate where things were, how we can best help. And so Alex is mentoring a few different guys, including his brother. This is his brother, to help raise up some leaders in the church. And so Alex is working with his brother. I'm helping to mentor him through some online courses as well. He's studying Old Testament survey, and I'm walking, his name is David, and walking him through that course right now. He finished, the last course he finished was Principles of Bible Study, and so we're seeing guys take steps forward for the cause of Christ. So this is a pretty common site to sit out in the dirt area under a tree looking for shade, but that's what's happening there. There's our website, and so if you have not connected with us through that, we encourage you to go, and we have prayer cards back there for us and for Gato and Lorena, and we'd love for you to pick up that. Our website and email address is on those prayer cards, and you can connect with us. If you want to receive our monthly updates, not monthly, our regular updates, I should say, then you can go to the contact tab and go down to sign up for emails, and that you put in your information and you'll automatically get our updates. We're due to put out another one. I was just talking to someone about that. I said, this is not very exciting news right now. Like, what do I say? Okay, we visited another church this week or this month, and but there are things going on, like some of the things that I told you about, so we have to put all of that together and get that out. But we want to just say a special thank you to you. Thank you for the opportunity to come and visit with you and share with you today, but thank you for walking with us. I don't say that lightly. It really means a world, the relationship that we have with you guys. Not just your giving, but we know that you're praying for us and encouraging us. We love to get the notes and encouragements, and it means the world to us. So when you come and you guys are able to see our world, whether in Nicaragua or Ecuador, it just means the world to us to be able to share that part of life and ministry with you. So thank you for your part in our lives and ministry and missions, and we look forward to that.